Bad call, sweetheart. This is my range, my problem. You just stand there and look pretty. The words, saturated with the casual arrogance of a man long accustomed to being the loudest voice in any room, echoed under the corrugated steel roof of the briefing area. Gunnery Sergeant Rourke smirked, a gesture that crinkled the sun-beaten skin around his eyes, and a wave of nervous snickers rippled through the assembled platoon of young Marines. They were eager, impressionable, and Rourke was their oracle, his every pronouncement gospel. The oppressive heat of the Mojave baked the very air they breathed, making it thick and heavy, a physical weight that seemed to press down on the lone figure who was the target of his derision. She offered no reaction, not a flicker of anger, not a tightening of the jaw, not a narrowing of her eyes. Her name was Vance, and in the world of bellowed orders and rigid hierarchies, her silence was a strange, unsettling anomaly. She simply stood, her posture a study in relaxed readiness, her gaze fixed on the tactical map where a complex hostage rescue scenario was laid out in stark black and red lines. But when the visiting general, a man whose face was a roadmap of forgotten conflicts, lifted his binoculars from the distant observation tower, he didn't see a chastened subordinate. He saw something else. He saw a predator's stillness. He saw the way her eyes, a pale, piercing gray, weren't just looking at the map, but were scanning the horizon beyond it, tracking the subtle dance of a dust devil a mile away, registering the almost invisible shimmer of thermal distortion rising from the steel skin of the shoot house. Her appearance was a carefully constructed piece of camouflage. She was of average height, with plain brown hair pulled back in a severe regulation bun. Her uniform was standard issue, faded from the sun and countless washings, but impeccably maintained. The rifle she held, a standard M210, looked like any other, but the general, a connoisseur of the tools of war, noted the way the stock was worn smooth in a very specific place, a subtle customization that spoke not of hours or days, but years of intimate familiarity. Her hands, resting lightly on the weapon, were steady, the knuckles scarred, the fingers long and practiced. They were the hands of a surgeon, or a concert pianist, or of something far more dangerous. She was an observer, a name on a roster with no rank attached, a ghost in the machine of the base's daily grind. To Rourke and his acolytes, she was a nobody, an administrative officer sent from on high to tick boxes and get in the way. Her silence was weakness. Her calm was ignorance. Her presence was an inconvenience. They could not have been more wrong. If you believe quiet competence is the loudest statement of all, type proven in the comments below. Gunnery Sergeant Rourke, emboldened by the laughter of his men and the woman's utter lack of response, jabbed a thick finger at the map, his voice once again booming with theatrical confidence. His plan was a reflection of his personality, loud, direct, and utterly devoid of subtlety. It was a frontal assault, a battering ram of shock and awe designed to overwhelm the simulated hostiles through sheer brute force. "We breach here," he declared, stabbing at the main entrance of the multi-story structure. Flashbangs, immediate entry. First squad takes the ground floor, second squad stacks, and moves to 2. We collapse on the objective from the bottom up. Overwhelming firepower. Any questions? There were none. The young Marines nodded, their faces alight with the promise of controlled violence. It was then that Vance spoke, her voice so quiet it seemed to cut through Rourke's noise like a razor. It was flat, devoid of emotion, a simple statement of fact. "Sir," she said, pointing a single, steady finger to a small, insignificant-looking window on the building's 4th floor. "Wind analysis shows a thermal inversion layer forming over target building 3, beginning around the 3rd story. It will create a significant cross-draft at the 4th floor northwest window. Your primary sniper team's sight picture will be distorted, unusable. Suggest alternate overwatch position on the eastern ridge." The silence that followed was heavy, shocked. Rourke slowly turned, his face a mask of incredulous fury. It was this observation, this quiet, technical correction, that had provoked his condescending reply. "Bad call, sweetheart," he seethed, the words dripping with scorn. You think you know wind better than me? I've been breathing this desert dust since before you were born. That eastern ridge is a kill box, a tactical dead, and he saw this not as a professional disagreement, but a personal challenge to his authority, and he decided to make an example of her. A cruel smile spread across his lips. You know what? You want an alternate position? You got it. Take your rifle and get yourself to that ridge. You'll have a great view of our victory. It was a public humiliation, a banishment. He was not just sidelining her. He was placing her in a position designed to be useless, a place from which she could only watch his own strategy succeed, proving her bad call wrong. The recruits exchanged smug glances. The woman had overstepped, and the gunny was putting her back in her box. They gave her dismissive looks as she turned to leave, their loyalty to Rourke absolute. Vance's response was the same as before. Nothing. Just a crisp, understood gunnery sergeant. She methodically gathered her gear, slinging the M210 over her shoulder. The weapon seemed to be a natural extension of her body. Without another word, she began the long, solitary walk toward the barren, sun-blasted ridge, her steps even and efficient, leaving the noise and the arrogance behind her. Vance's journey to the eastern ridge was not a simple walk. It was a masterclass in tactical movement, a silent ballet of infiltration performed for an audience of none. She didn't follow the worn vehicle track that led part of the way up the slope. Instead, she moved along the natural contours of the land, using shallow arroyos and clusters of creosote bush as concealment. Her pace was steady, almost hypnotic, a ground-eating rhythm that consumed the distance with an unnerving efficiency. The Mojave sun was a physical hammer, beating down with a relentless, white-hot fury that made the air dance and waver. Yet, she showed no sign of fatigue, no sheen of sweat on her brow. Her breathing remained deep and controlled, her body a perfectly regulated machine designed for endurance in the harshest environments on Earth. Reaching the designated position, she didn't just drop her pack and lie down. She conducted a meticulous 360-degree survey, her eyes cataloging every rock, every shadow, every potential line of sight. She selected a spot between two rust-colored boulders that offered both superior concealment and a commanding view of the shoot house below. From her pack, she produced a simple, sand-colored scrim net, but the way she deployed it was anything but simple. She angled it with practiced precision, not just to break up her outline, but to align with the existing shadow patterns, making her virtually invisible to the naked eye from any direction. She became a part of the landscape, another fold in the fabric of the desert. The focus then shifted to her hands. They moved with a fluid, methodical grace that was mesmerizing to watch. One moment, she was using a soft cloth to clean the lens of her high-powered scope, her touch as delicate as a watchmaker's. The next, she was retrieving a single cartridge from a pouch and chambering around. The sound it made was not loud, but it was profoundly definitive, a smooth, mechanical click-clack that was the physical embodiment of purpose. Down below, the exercise began. Rourke's voice, tinny and distorted through the comms, bellowed, "Execute, execute, execute." The breech charge at the main door detonated with a hollow crump, and the first team poured inside. From Vance's perspective, looking through the crystalline clarity of her scope, the unfolding chaos was a silent, perfectly organized play. The world narrowed to the circular frame of her optic. She wasn't watching the main assault. She was watching the consequences of it. She saw the fatal funnels the teams were creating. She saw the overlapping fields of fire from simulated enemy positions that Rourke's plan had completely ignored. She saw the ambush waiting patiently on the fourth floor. Her heart rate, monitored by a simple watch on her wrist, remained a placid 60 beats per minute. Her breathing was a slow, meditative cadence. In, out, in, out. She was not a part of the chaos. She was not a victim of it. She was an island of absolute calm in a sea of manufactured panic, a silent professional waiting for the precise moment when arrogance would finally yield to reality. The carefully constructed edifice of Rourke's plan began to crumble almost immediately. The first sign of trouble came from his own sniper team, positioned exactly where he had dictated. "Command, this is Overwatch 1. A frantic voice crackled over the comms. "I've got nothing. The heat shimmer off that roof is distorting my entire sight picture. It's like looking through water. I cannot identify targets. Repeat, cannot identify." Rourke's response was a guttural curse. It was the exact variable Vance had predicted, the one he had so contemptuously dismissed. Down in the shoot house, things were escalating from bad to catastrophic. The lead assault team, charging up the central staircase, walked directly into a perfectly designed ambush. A spiderweb of red lights flashed across their tactical vests as the simulation system registered lethal hits. The confident shouts of moments before devolved into panicked cries. "Contact 4th floor. Multiple hostiles. We're pinned down, taking heavy casualties." The recruits who had been snickering at Vance were now trapped in a scenario spiraling violently out of their control, their training overwhelmed by a superior tactical problem. Rourke's voice on the command net lost its booming certainty, replaced by a strained, desperate edge. "Team 2, push through. Suppress that 4th floor window." But Team 2 was already bogged down on the 2nd floor, caught in a vicious crossfire from another set of hidden targets. The entire assault had stalled, turning the shoot house into a deadly logjam. And then the critical moment arrived. The linchpin of the simulated defense, the high-value target programmed as the enemy commander, appeared for a fleeting moment in the northwest 4th floor window. It was the exact window Vance had specified. The target was partially obscured by a support beam, exposed for no more than 3 seconds at an extreme downward angle through the shimmering curtain of heat and the unpredictable cross-draft. For the snipers in the primary position, it was a mathematically impossible shot. In the air-conditioned quiet of the observation tower, General Maddox watched the disaster unfold on the primary monitor, his face a grim mask of disappointment. This wasn't just a failed exercise. It was a failure of leadership, a failure of listening. He turned to his aide. "Who is that on the ridge?" he demanded, his voice low and sharp. "Give me a designation on that observer." The young lieutenant, flustered, began fumbling with a digital roster. "Just Vance, sir. That's all it says. Observer Vance." No rank listed. As his finger traced the screen, a single, sharp crack echoed across the desert. It was utterly distinct from the cacophony of the simulated battle. It was the sound of a single, powerful rifle firing a live round, or in this case, a hypersonic training blank designed to trip the acoustic sensors on the targets. It was a sound of absolute authority. On the monitor, and through the general's own powerful binoculars, the head of the target in the 4th floor window snapped back. A small, green light on the target's chest sensor flashed on, signaling a perfect, central hit. The system registered it instantly. High-value target neutralized. A wave of profound, deafening silence washed over the comms network. The simulated gunfire ceased. The panicked shouting stopped. Down below, the surviving recruits froze in place, looking up at the 4th floor in stunned disbelief. Rourke stood before his command console, his mouth agape, staring at the monitor. His mind couldn't process it. He finally keyed his mic, his voice a hoarse whisper. Who in the hell took that shot?" The silence that had blanketed the range was shattered by a new voice, one that sliced through the static with the cold authority of a glacier. It was General Maddox, his voice patched directly into Rourke's command channel from the observation tower, every syllable dripping with icy command. "Gunnery Sergeant Rourke. Report," the voice demanded, leaving no room for evasion. "Who neutralized the high-value target?" Rourke, visibly shaken, fumbled with his headset. The swagger and bluster had been stripped away, leaving behind a confused and humbled man. "Stand by, General," he stammered, his eyes darting frantically between his monitors and the roster. I don't know, sir. Overwatch 1 is reporting negative contact." It wasn't them. The general didn't bother to wait for Rourke's floundering investigation. His focus had narrowed with singular intensity. "Give me every piece of paper you have on range observer Vance," he ordered his aide. Access her full service record. I don't care what clearance you need to bypass. Do it now. The aide, sensing the seismic shift in the atmosphere, began typing with a furious intensity, his fingers flying across the keyboard. With a single command from a general, the entire training exercise was halted. All teams, stand down. Cease exercise, cease exercise. The command blared over the loudspeakers. The focus of the entire base, from the rawest recruit to the most seasoned instructor, pivoted from the failed assault to the miracle shot. The recruits began to emerge from the shoot house, their faces streaked with sweat and grime, their expressions a cocktail of bewilderment and burgeoning awe. They pulled off their helmets and stared, as one, toward the distant, sun-drenched ridge. All they could see was a tiny, indistinct figure methodically disassembling a rifle, seemingly oblivious to the shockwave she had just sent through their world. The name Vance began to move through the crowd, no longer a designation, but a question, a mystery whispered from one Marine to another. Who is she? Where did she come from? How did she make a shot that the best range snipers had deemed impossible? Rourke, his face pale, climbed into a dusty utility vehicle. He had to see for himself. He had to confront the source of this impossibility, to reconcile the unassuming woman he had mocked with the ghostly sharpshooter who had just salvaged his disastrous exercise with a single, perfect bullet. His entire professional worldview, built on decades of loud certainty, had been vaporized in the space a heartbeat. Back in the tower, the aide's frantic typing came to an abrupt halt. He stared at the screen, his eyes widening in disbelief. The file that had appeared was a fortress of digital redactions. Entire sections were blacked out with warnings of top secret //SCI / no foreign. It was a file that, by all rights, he shouldn't have been able to even access. But through the wall of classification, a few lines of text were shockingly, undeniably clear. He turned to the general, his voice barely a whisper, laced with a reverence that bordered on fear. Sir, you're going to want to see this. Right now, the heavy steel door of the observation tower swung open, and General Maddox descended the steps, his boots making no sound on the metal grate. He moved with a deliberate, leonine grace, his presence radiating an aura of command that silenced the nervous chatter on the range floor below. The assembled Marines parted for him instinctively, a sea of olive drab receding before his advance. He paid them no mind. His eyes were fixed on the lone figure walking down from the ridge. Vance moved with the same unhurried, economical gait she had used on her way up, her rifle now disassembled and stowed in its case, slung over her shoulder. She met Gunnery Sergeant Rourke midway. He had parked his vehicle and was standing beside it, a man adrift, his authority stripped bare. He looked from her placid face to the rifle case and back again, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find words that simply did not exist. He was a man who had built his world with loud words, and now, in the face of this silent competence, he was rendered utterly speechless. Maddox walked past Rourke as if he were a piece of the landscape. He stopped a respectful 5 paces from Vance, a distance that acknowledged both her personal space and her professional status. The entire base, it seemed, held its collective breath. The general's gaze was sharp, analytical. He looked at the faint, almost invisible trident insignia, bleached by a foreign sun, sewn into a non-regulation spot on her pack. He noted the subtle, ergonomic modifications to her gear, the kind of personal touches born not of preference, but of brutal, hard-won experience. He had seen gear like that before, but only in classified after-action reports, on men and women whose faces were always shadowed, their names always code. The general finally spoke, his voice not a command, but a quiet statement of professional recognition. I haven't seen a wind call like that since I was a young captain observing in the Hindu Kush, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the unnaturally silent range. A Tier 1 operator made a shot just like that. Saved my entire reconnaissance team from being overrun. They called him Reaper. Last I heard, he'd retired. Vance met the general's gaze, and for the first time, A flicker of something other than placid observation entered her eyes. It was a ghost of a memory. "He taught me how to shoot, sir," she replied, her voice still quiet, still flat. "He was my father." At that precise moment, the general's aide ran up, breathless, holding out a secured military tablet. Maddox took it, his eyes scanning the screen. The narrator's voice could have read the lines aloud. A litany of impossible achievements. Name, Ilara Vance. Rank, Senior Chief Petty Officer. Unit, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, DevGRU. Call sign, Seraph. Combat déploiement, 14 classified. Medals, Navy Cross, Silver Star with Combat V, Bronze Star, X3, Purple Heart, X2. Mission Profile, Tier 1 Special Mission Unit Sniper / Overwatch Lead. The list went on, a testament to a life lived at the sharpest edge of the spear. Maddox looked up from the screen, his face transformed. The professional curiosity was gone, replaced by a look of profound, absolute respect. Slowly, with a precision that bordered on reverence, the 4-star general brought his right hand up to his brow, his fingers perfectly aligned, and delivered a crisp, flawless salute. It was not a gesture from a general to an observer. It was a salute from one warrior to another, an acknowledgement of her place in the pantheon of legends. The sound of the general's hand slapping smartly against his brow was like a starter pistol firing at a silent race. The story didn't just spread through the base, it ignited. It leaped from the stunned recruits on the range to the instructors in the mess hall, from the mechanics in the motor pool to the pilots on the flight line. It traveled through encrypted chats and secure phone lines to other bases across the country and overseas. The whispers became a roar. "Did you hear what happened on Range 4? They said a female observer, no rank, made a shot the MARSOC guys couldn't. It wasn't just any observer. It was Team 6. Maddox saluted her. The call sign Seraph became an instant legend, a new myth added to the military's rich folklore. As with all such stories, the details were amplified with each retelling. The shot distance grew by 100 meters. The wind became a gale. The 3-second window of opportunity shrank to a single second. But the core of the story, the undeniable truth of it, remained perfectly intact. A quiet, unassuming woman had dismantled a mountain of arrogance with a single, perfectly placed round, and a 4-star general had honored her for it. Gunnery Sergeant Rourke's transformation was the most immediate and profound consequence. Later that day, General Maddox summoned him to the base commander's office. There was no shouting, no fury. The general's disappointment was a far more potent weapon. "Gunnery Sergeant," Maddox said, his voice a low, dangerous hum. "Your duty is to train these Marines to survive. Your ego is not part of that duty. Today, your assumptions nearly got a team killed in a real-world scenario. You mistook quiet for weakness. You mistook gender for inexperience. You valued the sound of your own voice more than a valid tactical assessment. That is a catastrophic failure of leadership. You will fix it." Rourke stood at attention, his face ashen, and took the reprimand without flinching. It was a brutal but necessary crucible. That evening, he found Vance by the armory, meticulously cleaning her rifle, breaking it down with an expert's familiarity. He approached her not as a superior, but as a penitent. He stood before her, stripped of his bluster, and for the first time, he was the one who was silent. "Senior Chief," he finally managed to say, the rank feeling foreign and respectful on his tongue. "I was wrong. What I said, what I did, there's no excuse. I apologize. What you did today, that shot, I've never seen anything like it. If you'd be willing, I'd like you to teach my men, teach me, what you know about reading the wind." Vance paused her work, looking up from the perfectly oiled bolt carrier group in her hands. She looked at Rourke, her gray eyes assessing him not as an antagonist, but as a student. There was no triumph in her expression, no hint of "I told you so." She simply nodded. "Yes, Gunnery Sergeant." She then picked up a small stone, held it out, and began to explain the subtle principles of Coriolis drift and its effect on ballistics at range, her voice patient, technical, and clear. She was not a victor enjoying her spoils. She was a teacher, a professional, sharing her hard-won competence not to elevate herself, but to make those around her better, stronger, and safer. The incident on the range became more than just a story. It evolved into a powerful teaching tool, a piece of institutional wisdom. Instructors at the base academy began to incorporate the advanced scenario into their leadership and tactical decision-making courses. It served as a stark, unforgettable lesson on the lethal dangers of cognitive bias and the critical importance of listening to every member of a team, regardless of their perceived rank, appearance, or background. The lesson was simple. The quietest voice in the room might possess the most important information. The barren, rocky ridge where she had made the impossible shot was unofficially christened Seraph's Perch. It became a landmark. Marine recruits on grueling ruck marches through the desert would pause at the base of the ridge, look up at the spot between the two rust-colored boulders, and share the story. It was a physical monument to the day's events, a reminder that true strength was not about being the loudest, but about being the most competent. A visible shift occurred among the recruits who had been part of Rourke's failed assault team. The experience had humbled them, shaking their youthful certainty to its core. In the barracks, the usual boisterous trash-talking was replaced by quieter, more serious conversations. They talked about wind calls, about thermodynamics, about the economy of motion Vance displayed. The young Marine who had laughed the loudest at Rourke's initial insult was now observed spending his evenings not in front of a screen, but on the floor, practicing the slow, rhythmic breathing techniques Vance had later demonstrated during her impromptu lesson. He was focused, disciplined, the arrogant swagger gone, replaced by a newfound respect for the unseen forces that govern a battlefield. The most tangible symbol of the event was placed in the main tactical briefing room, a space where hundreds of Marines would pass each day. The actual target from the fourth-floor window, with its single, perfectly centered puncture mark, was mounted on a polished wooden plaque. Beneath it, a small, engraved brass plate read, "Range for simulation, the Seraph shot. 1 round, 1 lesson." Competence wears no uniform. It was a constant, silent testament to the day that assumptions died. Vance herself remained a figure of quiet mystery. She completed her 2-week observation tour, filed her report, and departed the base as unobtrusively as she had arrived. She deflected all praise and attempts to Leoneize her actions with a simple, consistent phrase. "I was just doing my job." She sought no credit, no fame. Her legacy was not in the story they told about her, but in the profound and lasting changes she left in her wake. Her absence was more powerful than her presence had ever been. 6 months passed. The blistering heat of summer had given way to the crisp, cool air of a Mojave winter. On the same range 4, a new group of eager Marine recruits stood assembled, their breath misting in the morning chill. They were being briefed by Gunnery Sergeant Rourke. The man who stood before them was fundamentally different from the one who had berated Vance half a year earlier. The booming, theatrical voice was gone, replaced by a quieter, more measured tone. His confidence was still present, but it was no longer brittle. It was tempered, forged in the fires of humility. He was less of a tyrant and more of a mentor. He laid out a complex urban assault scenario on the tactical map, his explanation clear and concise. When he finished, he didn't dismiss them. Instead, he looked across the faces of the young Marines and asked a question he would never have asked before. What did I miss? See a flaw. Find a blind spot. Challenge the plan. A silence fell over the group. Then, a young female private, barely out of boot camp, hesitantly raised her hand. All eyes turned to her, then to Rourke, a palpable tension in the air as everyone waited for the inevitable explosion. The private pointed to a section of a map. "Gunnery Sergeant," she said, her voice nervous but steady. "Based on a morning's atmosphere pressure readings, the breach point on the west wall creates a potential Venturi effect down that alleyway. Our support by fire team could be exposed to ricochets." Rourke walked over to her, peering at the map. He was silent for a long moment, tracing the lines with his finger, his mind working through the physics. The recruits held their breath. He looked up, met the private's eyes, and nodded slowly. "That's a good call," he said, his voice laced with genuine respect. "A very good call. Walk the platoon through your reasoning." He had learned the lesson. He was now teaching it. The institution was stronger, smarter, and safer because of it. Miles away, in a quiet office at the Pentagon, General Maddox was signing a letter. It was an official letter of commendation for Senior Chief Petty Officer Ilara Vance, recommending her for a meritorious service medal for her contributions to the Marine Corps' advanced training curriculum. As he signed his name, he reflected on the incident. The modern warrior, he mused, was no longer just a physical specimen. They were thinkers, analysts, quiet professionals whose greatest weapons were their minds. True leadership, he wrote in a personal addendum, was not the ability to command, but the ability to recognize and amplify true competence, no matter the vessel in which it was found. The narrator could now articulate the core truth. A single act of undeniable professional excellence had sent ripples through an entire military culture. It had dismantled long-standing prejudices and rebuilt them with a foundation of earned respect. The real victory on that hot summer day wasn't neutralizing a plastic target. It was fundamentally changing the minds of the men who watched. The most important sound hadn't been the crack of the rifle, but the profound, instructive silence that followed it. A silence filled with awe, with humility, and with a new, enlightened understanding of what a warrior truly looks like. The final scene is not on a dusty range, but in the cold, gray chop of the Atlantic. A rigid-hull inflatable boat cuts through the waves under a starless sky. In it are silent figures, their faces obscured by night vision gear, their forms bulky with the tools of their trade. Among them, indistinguishable from the rest, is Vance. Her call sign, Seraph, is a myth to the outside world, but here, among her brothers in SEAL Team 6, she is simply a trusted operator, a ghost among ghosts, heading toward a destination the world will never know, to resolve a crisis the world will never hear about. She is the quiet professional, her work unending, her worth measured not in accolades, but in the lives she saves and the missions she completes. Back in the Mojave, the story of the Seraph shot has been fully absorbed into the base's cultural DNA. It is no longer just gossip, it is doctrine. New instructors tell it to fresh-faced trainees on their first day, not as a war story, but as a foundational parable. It is a cautionary tale against the corrosive poison of arrogance and a shining monument to the quiet power of competence. The legend serves as a constant reminder. Look deeper, listen closer, and never, ever judge a warrior by their uniform, their gender, or the volume of their voice. A true legacy, the narrator concludes, is not a statue in a parade ground or a medal in a display case. It is the standard you set for those who come after you. It is the positive change you inspire, the bad habits you break, the wisdom you impart. Senior Chief Ilara Vance left behind more than just the memory of an impossible shot. She left behind a higher standard of professionalism. She left behind a better way of thinking, a culture where listening was valued over shouting, and where respect was earned through action, not demanded by rank. Her silence had taught the arrogant more than 1,000 lectures ever could. Her calm had corrected more tactical errors than any formal reprimand. Her single, perfect action, born of thousands of hours of unseen, unglamorous, and disciplined practice, had rewritten the definition of strength for an entire generation of warriors who would pass through those gates. Ready to face a world where the quietest professional is often the most dangerous one. For more stories where quiet precision triumphs over loud assumption and where silent competence defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.